I stand in my childhood bedroom packing my last belongings, while my mother Sarah screams from downstairs about how ungrateful I am. For 3 years, I gave her $5,600 every month to pay off her mounting credit card debts and mortgage arrears. My younger brother Marcus convinced their mother that I was only helping to secure my inheritance. Now she wants me gone. But as I fold my final shirt, I start laughing because tomorrow, the foreclosure notice arrives. 3 years ago, I thought I was saving my family. The phone call came on a bitter December evening in 2021, just as I was closing up my accounting office in downtown Phoenix. My mother's voice cracked through the receiver, broken and desperate in a way that made my chest tighten. "Lynn, honey, I don't know what to do anymore," she sobbed. "They're going to take the house. I've tried everything, but the payments just keep getting bigger." I drove through the desert night to her place in Scottsdale, my mind racing with possibilities. Mom had always been proud, maybe too proud. After Dad died 5 years earlier, she'd insisted she could handle everything alone. The real estate market had been her world for decades, but the crash and subsequent recovery had left her scrambling for clients who never seemed to materialize. When I walked into the kitchen that night, papers covered every surface. Credit card statements, mortgage notices, collection letters. The numbers painted a terrifying picture: $89,000 in credit card debt, $34,000 in back mortgage payments. My mother sat at the table where we'd eaten countless family dinners, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "How did it get this bad?" I asked, trying to keep judgment out of my voice. "After your father passed, I kept thinking things would turn around," she whispered. "I took cash advances to keep the business going, used the cards for marketing and office expenses. But the sales never came back like they used to." My accounting firm had done well over the past 8 years. Specializing in small business tax preparation meant steady income, especially during busy seasons. I had savings, investments, a comfortable life with my girlfriend Jessica. Helping my mother felt like the right thing to do, the only thing to do. "I can help," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "We'll figure this out together." Jessica wasn't thrilled when I explained the situation the next morning. She stood in our kitchen wearing her scrubs, preparing for another 12-hour shift at the hospital. As a nurse practitioner, she understood financial stress from watching families struggle with medical bills, but she also recognized dangerous patterns. $5,600 every month is a lot of money, Lynn," she said, stirring her coffee with more force than necessary. "That's almost $70,000 a year. Are you sure this won't just enable her to avoid making real changes?" "She's my mother," I replied, though Jessica's concerns echoed my own doubts. "What else am I supposed to do? Let her lose the house where I grew up?" The monthly routine became automatic. Every first of the month, I transferred exactly $5,600 from my business account to Mom's checking account. She promised to use the money responsibly, to pay down the debt systematically while looking for part-time work to supplement her dwindling real estate income. At 58, Mom insisted she was too young for retirement, but too experienced for entry-level positions. She applied for administrative jobs, retail positions, anything that might provide steady income. The rejections mounted, and with each passing month, her mood grew darker. "I built a career in this town," she'd say during our weekly phone calls. 25 years helping families find homes, and now nobody wants to hire me for anything." My brother Marcus lived with her rent-free, contributing sporadically to household expenses when his freelance graphic design work provided income. At 28, he seemed content to drift between projects, spending most days playing video games or scrolling through social media. When I suggested he might consider a more stable job to help with family expenses, Mom always defended him. "Marcus is creative," she'd explain. "He can't be tied down to some soul-crushing corporate job. He's different from you." The comment stung, though I tried not to show it. Different how? Because I'd built a successful business. Because I took responsibility seriously. I pushed aside the hurt and focused on the practical matters. But after 18 months of payments, something felt wrong. Despite sending over $100,000, Mom's stress levels never seemed to decrease. She still called in tears about money troubles, still complained about mounting bills. The mortgage should have been current by now. The credit card significantly reduced. "How much do you still owe?" I asked during a visit in June 2023. Mom shuffled through papers on her dining room table, the same chaos I remembered from that first night. "Well, it's complicated. Some of the cards have variable interest rates, and there were some unexpected expenses." "Can I see the statements?" Her defensive reaction surprised me. "Lynn, I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't need you micromanaging my finances. I'm handling it." "Mom, I've given you almost $100,000. I think I deserve to know where it's going." "It's going to bills. What do you think I'm doing with it, buying jewelry?" The conversation ended awkwardly, but her reaction planted seeds of suspicion that grew over the following weeks. I started paying closer attention during visits, noticing things I'd previously overlooked. New throw pillows that looked expensive, a premium cable package with every movie channel, manicured nails, and professional highlights that didn't match someone struggling to pay basic expenses. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut 3 months later when I arrived unexpectedly on a Thursday afternoon. Mom wasn't home, but her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was watering plants on the front porch. "Yeah, your mother looked so relaxed coming back from her spa day yesterday," Mrs. Rodriguez commented cheerfully. She said the massage package was exactly what she needed after all her stress. Spa day. While I'd been working 60-hour weeks to fund her emergency payments, Mom had been treating herself to luxury services. The betrayal felt physical, a crushing weight in my chest that made breathing difficult. When I confronted her that evening, the mask finally slipped. "I deserve some happiness," she shouted, her face flushed with anger rather than embarrassment. "Do you have any idea what it's like to lose your husband, watch your career crumble, and feel like a burden to your own children? Those spa visits are the only thing keeping me sane." "Ah, but Mom, the whole point was to pay off your debts. If you're spending my money on luxuries—" "Your money?" Her laugh was bitter and sharp. "Since when did helping family come with so many strings attached? Your father would be ashamed of how controlling you've become." That night, I sat in my car outside her house for nearly an hour, trying to process what had just happened. The woman who raised me, who taught me about honesty and responsibility, had been lying for over a year. Worse, she seemed to believe she was entitled to my money without any accountability. I drove home to find Jessica waiting with a cup of tea and a gentle but firm expression. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Worse than I thought," I admitted, collapsing onto our couch. "I don't think any of my money actually went to debt payments. She's been using it as spending money while making minimum payments on everything else." Jessica sat beside me, her hand warm on my shoulder. "Lynn, you're being financially abused by your own mother. This isn't helping her. It's enabling a destructive pattern that's hurting both of you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with truth I wasn't ready to accept. How do you process the realization that your good intentions have been exploited by someone you love? How do you continue a relationship built on deception and manipulation? I thought I was being a good son. Instead, I'd been funding my mother's denial while she continued spiraling toward inevitable financial collapse. The foreclosure timeline had never changed because the real problems were never addressed. My money had simply delayed the reckoning while making it worse. As I stared at the ceiling that night, unable to sleep, one thought kept circling through my mind. If Mom had been dishonest about the money, what else had she been lying about? The next morning, I called Mom to demand a full accounting of how my payments had been used. Her response was everything I'd learned to expect from someone caught in a lie deflection, blame shifting, and emotional manipulation. "I can't believe my own son is interrogating me like some kind of criminal," she said, her voice dripping with wounded dignity. "After everything I've done for you, raising you practically alone, After your father got sick, this is how you repay me. Mom, I'm not attacking you. I just need to understand where the money went. If we're going to fix this situation, there's nothing to fix except your attitude, Lynn. You act like I'm some kind of charity case, instead of your mother who deserves respect. The conversation deteriorated from there, but it established a pattern that would define our relationship over the next several months. Every attempt at honest discussion was met with accusations of disrespect, ingratitude, or controlling behavior. Things got worse when Mom started confiding in Dorothy Patterson, her 63-year-old neighbor and bridge partner. Dorothy had recently gone through a messy divorce where her own children had sided with her ex-husband over financial disagreements. She seemed eager to project her bitterness onto our family situation. Dorothy says children today think they own their parents once they start helping financially. Mom told me during one of our increasingly tense phone calls. She says I need to protect myself from your attempts to control my life. I met Dorothy briefly at a 4th of July barbecue that summer. She was a sharp-eyed woman with perfectly styled gray hair and an air of refined grievance. Within minutes of meeting me, she launched into a monologue about ungrateful children and the importance of maintaining independence in later years. Your mother is a strong woman who doesn't need anyone managing her affairs, Dorothy declared while balancing a plate of potato salad. She's told me how you've been pressuring her about every little purchase. That's no way to treat someone who gave you life. The conversation left me feeling off balance and defensive. Was I being unreasonable? Was expecting transparency about $70,000 a year somehow controlling? I started second-guessing my own perceptions, which I later realized was exactly the intended effect. Marcus, who had been relatively neutral during the initial stages of the crisis, began showing increased hostility during our Sunday family dinners. These gatherings, once a pleasant tradition, became minefields of passive-aggressive comments and loaded silences. Must be nice to have so much money you can play Lord of the Manor with everyone else, Marcus said one evening while we cleared dishes. Some of us don't have the luxury of using our bank accounts to buy influence. That's not what this is about, I replied, though his words stung. I'm trying to help Mom get out of debt, not control her. By demanding to see every receipt, by questioning every decision she makes. Face it, Lynn, you've turned into Dad's worst qualities without any of his good ones. The comparison to our father was a low blow that Marcus knew would hurt. Dad had been a meticulous record keeper sometimes, to the point of obsessiveness. But he'd never used money as a weapon or demanded accountability from people he was trying to help. That's not fair, and you know it, I said. What I know is that Mom was happier before you started your monthly interrogations. Maybe the problem isn't her spending. Maybe it's your need to control everything. These confrontations began happening regularly with Marcus, seemingly determined to position himself as Mom's defender against my supposed tyranny. I later learned that Mom had been sharing carefully edited versions of our conversations, painting me as an unreasonable bully while omitting her own deceptions. The situation escalated when I discovered Mom had been spreading her version of events throughout our extended family and social circle. Uncle Robert, Dad's brother, called me in late August with concerns about what he'd been hearing. Lynn, your mother says you've been threatening to cut off her support unless she gives you control over all her finances. He said, his tone careful but troubled. That doesn't sound like the nephew I know, but I wanted to hear your side. Explaining the truth to Uncle Robert was exhausting and humiliating. How do you tell someone that your mother has been lying without sounding like you're attacking her character? How do you defend yourself against accusations that contain just enough twisted truth to sound plausible? I never threatened anything, Dad, I explained. I asked to see where my money was going because the debt levels weren't improving. Then I found out she's been using my payments for spa treatments and shopping while making only minimum payments on her actual bills. Uncle Robert listened quietly occasionally, asking clarifying questions. By the end of the conversation, he seemed to understand my position better. but the damage was already spreading through our family network. Cousin Amanda Roberts' daughter started making pointed comments during family gatherings about the importance of trusting family members and not letting money corrupt relationships. Other relatives began treating me with a subtle coolness that suggested they'd heard Mom's version of events but weren't interested in hearing mine. The isolation was emotionally devastating. I'd always been the responsible one in the family, the person others turned to for help with taxes, financial planning, or practical advice. Suddenly, I was being painted as the villain in a story where I'd tried to do the right thing. Jessica watched me struggle with this character assassination with growing concern. You can't control what other people think, she reminded me during one of many late-night conversations about the situation. But you can control whether you keep enabling this behavior. I can't just abandon my mother, and I said. Whatever her flaws, she's still family. No one's asking you to abandon her, but giving her unlimited money without any accountability isn't helping her. It's making her problems worse while destroying your relationship and your reputation. As summer turned to fall, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of demanding transparency after the fact, I offered to pay Mom's bills directly. This would ensure the money went to its intended purpose while removing the temptation for discretionary spending. Mom's reaction was explosive. "Absolutely not," she shouted over the phone. "I'm not a child who needs you managing my checkbook. If you can't trust me to handle my own affairs, then maybe you shouldn't be involved at all." "Mom, it's not about trust. It's about making sure the money actually addresses the problems it's supposed to solve." "The only problem here is your attitude, Lynn. You've become controlling and suspicious, just like Dorothy said you would. She warned me this was how it would go once you started thinking you owned me." The mention of Dorothy's influence made my stomach clench. How had a bitter neighbor become more trusted than her own son? How had wanting accountability for $70,000 become proof of controlling behavior? "Dorothy doesn't know our family situation," I said, trying to keep frustration out of my voice. "She's projecting her own problems onto our relationship." "Dorothy knows what it's like to have children turn against you over money. She's been through exactly what I'm going through now." "What you're going through, Mom, I've been giving you more money than most people make in a year, and you've been lying about how it's being used. I'm not the victim here." The call ended with Mom hanging up on me, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. How had trying to help my mother turned into such a nightmare? How had my good intentions become evidence of bad character? That weekend, Jessica and I went for a long hike in South Mountain Park, trying to clear our heads and gain perspective on the situation. The desert landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, its stark beauty a reminder that some problems were bigger than family drama. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," I confided as we paused at an overlook. "Everything I thought I knew about my family relationships has been turned upside down." "That's how gaslighting works," Jessica replied gently. "When someone consistently denies reality and enlists others to support their version, it makes you question your own perceptions. But what if I am being unreasonable? What if wanting to see where my money goes really is controlling?" Jessica turned to face me, her expression serious. "Lynn, if you loaned a friend $70,000 and they refused to tell you how they spent it, would that be controlling to ask for an accounting? Of course not. Then why is it different because she's your mother? Love doesn't mean accepting deception. Family doesn't mean abandoning reasonable boundaries." As we made our way back down the mountain, I felt a shift in my thinking. For months, I'd been so focused on trying to fix things that I'd lost sight of what was actually happening. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a communication problem. This was a pattern of financial deception enabled by emotional manipulation and supported by people who had their own reasons for encouraging it. The realization was painful, but clarifying. I couldn't force Mom to be honest with me, but I could stop funding her dishonesty. I couldn't control her narrative about our relationship, but I could stop participating in interactions that consistently left me feeling confused and defeated. When I got home that evening, there was a message from Uncle Robert on my voicemail. His tone was different this time, more concerned than accusatory. "Lynn, your cousin Amanda mentioned something about your mother buying expensive items recently. I'm starting to think there might be more to this story than what we've been hearing. Give me a call when you get a chance." Maybe the truth was starting to emerge despite Mom's careful narrative management. Maybe other family members were beginning to notice inconsistencies in her story. But even if they were, I was beginning to understand that I couldn't wait for external validation to make necessary changes. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to reduce my monthly payments to $3,000 and require detailed documentation of how the money was being used. If Mom refused, the payments would stop entirely. It was time to find out whether she wanted genuine help or just a source of funding for her denial. Mom's reaction to my new conditions was swift and vicious. Within hours of our phone conversation about reduced payments and documentation requirements, my office phone rang with a call that made my blood freeze. "Mr. Walsh, this is Detective Maria Santos with the Phoenix Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. We've received a complaint regarding potential financial coercion of an elderly person. We'd like to schedule a time to speak with you about your relationship with Sarah Walsh." I sat in stunned silence for several seconds before finding my voice. "I'm sorry, what kind of complaint?" Sir, I can't discuss details over the phone, but we take allegations of elder financial abuse very seriously. Would tomorrow morning at 9 work for you to come in and discuss the situation? After hanging up, I immediately called my attorney David Rodriguez, whom I'd used for business matters over the years. David had handled contract disputes and regulatory issues, but financial elder abuse allegations were outside his usual scope. "This is serious, Lynn," he said after I explained the situation. "Even false allegations can destroy a professional license in your field. We need to treat this as a potential criminal matter." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table trying to process what was happening. My mother had actually called the police on me for trying to ensure my money was being used responsibly. She'd turned my attempt to help into evidence of criminal behavior. Jessica found me there at midnight, still staring at the same cup of cold coffee. "She filed a police report," I said without looking up. "She actually called the cops and accused me of financial abuse." Jessica sat beside me, her hand finding mine across the table. "What exactly did she tell them?" "I don't know yet, but I can guess. Probably something about me threatening to cut off her support unless she gives me control over her finances." Technically true, but missing all the context about where the money's actually been going. The next morning's meeting with Detective Santos was surreal. She was a professional woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor. She explained that Mom had provided recordings of our recent conversations as evidence of coercion. "Kate, Mrs. Walsh claims you've been demanding control over her financial affairs in exchange for continued support," Detective Santos said, consulting her notes. "She says you've threatened to leave her homeless if she doesn't comply with your demands." Detective, I've been giving my mother $5,600 every month for almost 3 years," I replied. "That's over $200,000 total. When I discovered she was using the money for spa treatments instead of debt payments, I asked for accountability. That's not coercion. That's common sense. Can you provide documentation of these payments?" I'd brought bank records showing regular transfers to Mom's account. Detective Santos reviewed them carefully, her expression growing more thoughtful. "This is a significant amount of money," she noted. "Mrs. Walsh indicated you were providing minimal assistance that you were leveraging for control." "Alt $200,000 is minimal assistance?" "Sir, I'm just telling you what was reported. Do you have any evidence regarding how these funds were actually used?" That's when I realized how carefully Mom had planned this. She had recordings of me demanding transparency, but no recordings of her admitting to misusing the money. She had documentation of my threats to reduce payments, but no documentation of her deception about spa treatments and shopping sprees. David stepped in at that point, providing context about financial elder abuse that actually protects the abuser rather than the victim. He explained how my mother's recordings could be seen as evidence that I wasn't coercing her since she felt safe enough to refuse my requests and contact authorities. The meeting ended without charges, but Detective Santos made it clear the investigation would continue. She recommended I document all future interactions with my mother and avoid any actions that could be construed as threatening. Driving home from the police station, I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. How had trying to prevent financial abuse of my own resources become evidence that I was the abuser? How had my mother managed to position herself as the victim in a situation where she'd been deceiving me for years? The answer came that weekend when I discovered Marcus had been coaching Mom on what to say to investigators. I arrived at the house unannounced on Saturday morning to find them reviewing a script Marcus had written. "Remember, don't mention the spa visits or the shopping," Marcus was saying as I walked into the kitchen. "Focus on how controlling he's become and how scared you are of being cut off." They both looked up in shock when they saw me standing in the doorway. "Look, so this is how it works," I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the rage boiling inside me. "You coach her on how to lie to the police about financial abuse while you live rent-free in a house I'm paying for." Marcus stood up, his chest puffed with false bravado. "Someone has to protect her from your manipulation. You've been using money to control this family for years." "I've been trying to help this family for years. There's a difference, though. I can see why you wouldn't understand that concept." "Help you call demanding to see every receipt, helping you call threatening to throw our mother into the street, helping..." "I call asking where $200,000 went reasonable. I call wanting accountability for ongoing payments responsible. But you're right about one thing, Marcus. I am done helping people who think I owe them unlimited support with no questions asked." Mom finally spoke up, her voice small but defiant. "Lynn, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Dorothy says..." "I don't care what Dorothy says," I snapped, losing my composure for the first time. "Dorothy isn't giving you $6,000 a month. Dorothy isn't having her business investigated because of your false accusations. Dorothy doesn't have anything to do with this except stirring up trouble in a family that was trying to work things out." "Don't you dare raise your voice to our mother," Marcus said, stepping between us. "Our mother. When was the last time you contributed anything to help her situation? When was the last time you paid rent, utilities, or groceries? You want to talk about family loyalty while living as a parasite." The confrontation escalated from there, with accusations flying and old grievances surfacing. But underneath all the shouting, I finally understood what was really happening. Marcus wasn't defending Mom out of love or loyalty. He was defending his own interests. As long as I was sending money every month, Marcus could continue his comfortable lifestyle without responsibility or expectations. My threat to reduce payments threatened his security, not just Mom's. The police complaint wasn't about protecting an elderly woman from financial abuse. It was about protecting a grown man from having to support himself. When I left that morning, I knew our relationship had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Mom had enlisted outside help to paint me as a criminal for wanting accountability. Marcus had revealed his true priorities by coaching her deception. And somewhere in the background, Dorothy Patterson was encouraging it all for reasons that had nothing to do with our family's well-being. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls that changed everything. First, I called my bank to stop the automatic transfers to Mom's account. No more monthly payments until this situation was resolved properly. Second, I called Detective Santos to report that I'd witnessed my mother and brother rehearsing false statements for the investigation. I explained that I had concerns about a potential conspiracy to file false reports and commit financial fraud. "Mr. Walsh, that's a serious allegation," Detective Santos said. "Do you have evidence of this conspiracy?" I saw them practicing lies about our interactions. I also have bank records showing that none of my payments went to debt reduction as claimed. If you investigate the actual use of my money, you'll find it went to luxury services, while the underlying debts remained unchanged. Sir, we'll need to investigate these claims. In the meantime, I recommend you avoid contact with your mother unless it's documented or witnessed. That evening, Jessica and I sat on our back patio, watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and purple. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. "How do you feel?" Jessica asked. Scared," I admitted, "but also relieved. I've been trying to save people who don't want to be saved. I've been funding my own destruction while calling it love." "What happens now?" "Now we find out who my family really is, when the money stops flowing. And we see if Detective Santos is more interested in finding the truth or just closing a case." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, I realized that stopping the payments wasn't punishment or retaliation. It was the most loving thing I could do for everyone involved. Mom needed to face the consequences of her choices without a safety net that enabled continued deception. Marcus needed to learn that relationships require contribution, not just consumption, and I needed to reclaim my own life from people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. The battle was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I was fighting for the right things in the right way. Whatever happened next, I would face it with clear eyes and clean hands. The phone rang around 10 that night. Mom's number appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. When I played the message back an hour later, her voice was desperate and angry in equal measure. "Lynn, I know you stopped the payments. How could you do this to me? After everything I've done for you, after raising you and sacrificing for this family, this is how you repay me. Dorothy was right about you. You're just like your father's family, cold and calculating. Don't think I won't remember this when it comes time to distribute inheritance. You've made your choice, and I've made mine." I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I was going to sleep peacefully for the first time in months. The truth has a way of setting you free, even when it hurts more than the lies ever did. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide my life into before and after. The return address read Arizona State Board of Accountancy, and my hands actually trembled as I opened the envelope. Notice of investigation into professional conduct violations. The header announced in bold letters. Below that, a clinical description of allegations that made my stomach turn: misuse of professional position to coerce financial arrangements with elderly family member. Potential violations of ethical standards regarding conflicts of interest and abuse of fiduciary relationships. I called David Rodriguez immediately, barely able to speak coherently. "They're investigating my professional license," I managed to say. "Sarah filed a complaint with the state board claiming I used my position as an accountant to manipulate her finances." "Bring the letter and all your documentation," David said grimly. "We need to treat this as a potential career-ending situation." That afternoon in David's office, the scope of the attack became clear. Mom hadn't just filed a police report, she'd systematically targeted every aspect of my professional and personal life. She'd complained to the state board, contacted several of my business clients to warn them about my character, and even reached out to Jessica's supervisor at the hospital with concerns about my controlling behavior. "This is a coordinated campaign to destroy your reputation," David observed, reviewing the various complaints and communications. Someone helped her plan this strategy. The answer to who that someone was came the next day when I hired a private investigator named Rachel Stone to look into Dorothy Patterson's background. What she uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. Dorothy's son, Tommy Patterson, was a small-time real estate scammer who specialized in targeting elderly women with promises of investment opportunities. Over the past 5 years, he'd been involved in 3 different schemes that separated seniors from their savings through timeshare fraud, fake property flips, and bogus rental income programs. Your mother's neighbor has been feeding her advice that benefits her son's criminal enterprise, Rachel explained during our meeting. The timeshare your mother bought with money borrowed against your payments. That was one of Tommy's operations. He likely made several thousand in commission from that single transaction. The pieces finally clicked into place. Dorothy hadn't been offering friendly advice. She'd been grooming Mom as a target for her son's schemes. The constant encouragement to maintain independence and resist my controlling behavior was designed to keep Mom financially vulnerable and isolated from family members who might recognize the fraud. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Based on what I've found, your mother has been involved in at least 4 different investment schemes over the past 18 months. Total exposure is probably around $40,000, all funded by money she borrowed using your payments as proof of income. I felt physically sick. Not only had Mom been lying about using my money for debt payments, she'd been using it as collateral to borrow additional money for investment scams. Every dollar I'd sent to help her had actually made her situation worse, while enriching criminals who saw her as easy prey. That evening, I tried calling Uncle Robert to share what I'd learned, but he cut me off before I could explain. "Lynn, I can't talk to you about family matters anymore," he said, his voice strained. "Sarah showed me the letter from the state board. Whatever's happening between you two, I can't risk getting involved if there are professional ethics violations." Uncle Robert, she's being targeted by scammers. The woman who's been giving her advice has a criminal son who's been stealing her money. That sounds like exactly the kind of story someone would make up to deflect from their own problems. "I'm sorry, Lynn, but until this investigation is resolved, I think it's better if we don't communicate." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Mom's strategy was working perfectly. By painting me as the aggressor and herself as the victim, she'd isolated me from potential allies while positioning herself as the sympathetic figure who needed protection. Marcus's role in all this became clear that weekend when I drove past the house and saw a moving truck in the driveway. Through my investigator, I learned that Mom had signed preliminary papers to sell the house to a cash buyer for $30,000 below market value. The buyer was connected to Tommy Patterson's network of shell companies. When I confronted Marcus about the sale the next day, his mask finally dropped completely. "You're damn right we're selling," he said, his voice full of venom. "Mom deserves to enjoy her money without you breathing down her neck about every penny. She's going to move to Florida with Dorothy and finally have some peace." "Marcus, the people buying the house are criminals. They're paying below market value because it's part of a money laundering scheme. Mom is being scammed." That's rich coming from someone who's being investigated for financial crimes. Maybe the real scammer is the guy who demanded control over an elderly woman's finances. "I never demanded control. I asked for accountability for my own money that I was giving her freely." "Your money, your control, your demands. Do you hear yourself? You sound exactly like the controlling abuser the police report describes." The conversation revealed something that chilled me to the bone. Marcus wasn't just enabling Mom's bad decisions, he was actively participating in them because he expected to benefit. His plan was to take his share of the house proceeds and use it to fund his own move to Florida, where he could continue living off Mom's resources without interference from me. "You've been planning this for months," I realized. The police report the state board complaint turning the family against me. It was all designed to get me out of the picture so you could help her liquidate everything. "Okay, finally you're starting to understand," Marcus said with a cold smile. "Mom doesn't need you anymore. She has people who actually care about her happiness, instead of just controlling her." That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by bank records, legal documents, and investigative reports, trying to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy. Mom wasn't just a victim of financial predators. She'd become an active participant in schemes designed to separate her from legitimate family support. Marcus wasn't just an enabling son, he was a co-conspirator planning to benefit from her exploitation. And I wasn't just a concerned family member trying to help. I was the obstacle that had to be removed for the scheme to succeed. The realization was devastating and liberating in equal measure. For months, I'd been trying to understand my family's behavior through the lens of love, loyalty, and good intentions gone wrong. But this wasn't about family dynamics or miscommunication. This was about money manipulation and criminal exploitation disguised as family conflict. Jessica found me there at 2 a.m, still reviewing documents and trying to process the implications. How could I have been so blind? I asked. How could I not see that my own mother was working with people who were stealing from her? Because you loved her and trusted her, Jessica replied gently. Because you assumed good faith from people who were acting in bad faith. That's not a character flaw, Lynn. That's what makes you a decent person. But it almost destroyed my career and my reputation. If I hadn't hired Rachel to investigate Dorothy, I might never have figured out what was really happening. Well, but you did figure it out, and now you can protect yourself and maybe even help other potential victims. The next morning, I called Detective Santos to report what my investigator had discovered about Tommy Patterson and his connection to my family situation. Her response was immediate and professional. Mr. Walsh, this changes the nature of our investigation significantly. If your mother was being targeted by a known scammer, her complaints against you might be part of a larger pattern of victim isolation. We'll need to coordinate with other agencies that are investigating Patterson's activities. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope that the truth might actually matter. The investigation was shifting from whether I'd abused my mother to whether she'd been manipulated into making false accusations as part of a criminal conspiracy. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. I was going to file my own police report against Tommy Patterson, Dorothy Patterson, and potentially Marcus and Mom for conspiracy to commit fraud and filing false reports. My family had chosen to align themselves with criminals rather than work with me to solve real problems. They'd weaponized law enforcement and professional licensing boards to attack me for trying to protect my own resources from theft. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But this time, I was fighting with truth evidence and legitimate authority on my side. This time, the people who'd been operating in shadows and deception were going to face the light of serious investigation. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was on the right side of them. The eviction notice taped to Mom's front door was almost anticlimactic after everything that had happened. 30 days to remove my belongings from the house where I'd grown up, signed by Sarah Walsh and witnessed by Dorothy Patterson. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. My childhood was officially over, and the woman who'd given birth to me was the one ending it. But by that point, I had bigger concerns than retrieving old photo albums and high school trophies. My investigation into Tommy Patterson had uncovered a fraud network that extended far beyond my family's situation. Working with Detective Frank Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit, we'd identified at least 12 elderly victims who'd lost a combined total of over $300,000 to various Patterson schemes over the past 2 years. Your mother appears to be the most recent target, Detective Morrison explained during one of our meetings. The pattern is always the same: establish a relationship through a trusted intermediary, usually another elderly woman, who's already been victimized, then gradually introduce investment opportunities that seem legitimate, but are actually money transfers to offshore accounts. How much has she lost total? Based on what we can track, probably around $60,000 in direct investments plus whatever debt she accumulated using your payments as collateral. But the real damage might be the house sale. If that goes through at the agreed price, she'll lose at least $30,000 in equity. That should rightfully be hers. The house sale had become the focal point of our investigation because it revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. The cash buyer was a shell company controlled by Tommy Patterson's associates designed to purchase properties below market value from elderly victims who'd been convinced they needed to liquidate assets quickly. Oh, the beauty of the scheme is that it looks voluntary, Detective Morrison continued. The victims believe they're making smart financial decisions based on advice from trusted friends. By the time they realize they've been defrauded, the money is gone and the relationships have been severed. Rachel Stone, my private investigator, had been working around the clock to document the connections between various entities in Patterson's network. What she discovered was a sophisticated operation that preyed on elderly isolation and financial vulnerability. Dorothy Patterson isn't just a neighbor who got friendly with your mother, Rachel explained during one of our strategy sessions. She's been systematically cultivating relationships with financially stressed seniors throughout Scottsdale and Phoenix. Her role is to identify targets, build trust, and then introduce them to investment opportunities controlled by her son. How many others are there? We've identified at least 8 women in similar situations, all recently widowed or divorced, all struggling with debt or fixed incomes, all introduced to Dorothy through seemingly innocent social activities like bridge clubs or church groups. The scope of the operation was staggering. Tommy Patterson had built a criminal enterprise that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars annually by exploiting the trust and vulnerability of elderly women. And my mother, far from being an innocent victim, had become an active recruiter for the scheme. Sarah has been encouraging other women in her social circle to consider similar investment opportunities, Rachel continued. We have evidence of at least 3 introductions she's made between Dorothy and potential new targets. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing to accept that Mom had been deceived and manipulated. It was another to learn that she'd become complicit in deceiving others. The woman who'd raised me to value honesty and integrity had transformed into someone who helped criminals target vulnerable seniors. The eviction deadline was approaching, and I knew I had to retrieve my belongings before the 30-day period expired. But I also knew that entering the house would likely trigger another confrontation that could complicate the ongoing investigation. David Rodriguez advised treating the retrieval as a legal matter rather than a family visit. Document everything, bring witnesses, and avoid any conversation that isn't directly related to removing your property. The last thing we need is another allegation of threatening behavior. I arranged to visit the house on a Saturday morning, bringing Jessica and Uncle Robert as witnesses. Despite our recent estrangement, Robert had agreed to help after I shared the evidence about the Patterson scam. He was horrified to learn that his sister-in-law had become involved with criminals, even if she didn't fully understand the nature of their activities. "I owe you an apology," he said as we drove to the house. "I should have listened more carefully when you tried to explain what was happening." Sarah always had a talent for making herself seem like the victim, even when she was the one causing problems. The house felt like a crime scene when we arrived. Moving boxes filled every room, and strangers were sorting through furniture and personal belongings. Dorothy Patterson was directing the packing like a general commanding troops, while Mom sat in the corner, looking overwhelmed and disconnected from the chaos around her. "What are you doing here?" Marcus demanded when he saw me walk through the front door. "You're not welcome in this house anymore." "I'm here to collect my belongings as required by the eviction notice you had served on me," I replied calmly, holding up the legal document. "I have 30 days to retrieve my property, and today is day 28. Dorothy immediately inserted herself into the conversation, her voice sharp with false authority. "Sarah doesn't want you here. You're causing stress during an already difficult time." "Mrs. Patterson, I don't believe we've been formally introduced," Uncle Robert said, stepping forward with a diplomatic smile. "I'm Robert Walsh, Sarah's brother-in-law. I'm here to help Lynn collect his things so we can resolve this situation quickly and peacefully." The tension in the room was electric as Dorothy realized she was outnumbered, and that Robert's presence changed the dynamic significantly. She couldn't dismiss me as easily with a respected family elder present to witness the interaction. Mom finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. "Lynn, I don't understand why you had to involve the police in our family business. Can't we work this out ourselves?" "Mom, there are no police here today," I said gently. "I'm just here to get my things like you asked me to. But since you brought up the police, you should know they're very interested in your friendship with Dorothy and her son Tommy." Dorothy's face went pale at the mention of Tommy's name, and she immediately began gathering her purse and jacket. "Sarah, I think I should go. This feels like a family matter that doesn't concern me." "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, it concerns you very much," Uncle Robert said, his diplomatic tone sharpening. "Especially if you've been advising my sister-in-law to make financial decisions that benefit your son's business interests." "I don't know what you're implying, but I don't appreciate the accusation," Dorothy replied, her voice rising defensively. "I'm not implying anything," Robert continued. "I'm stating directly that police investigators have identified a pattern of elderly fraud involving your son and your role as a recruiter. Sarah isn't just your friend. She's your victim." The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in my family. Marcus screamed about lies and manipulation, while Dorothy frantically tried to leave. Mom sat in stunned silence as the truth about her trusted advisor emerged in real time. "Sarah, these people have been using you," Uncle Robert explained patiently. "The investment opportunities, the advice about maintaining independence, even the suggestions about filing complaints against Lynn. It was all designed to isolate you from family members who might recognize what was happening." "That's not true," Mom whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Dorothy is my friend. She's been helping me navigate a difficult situation with Lynn. By encouraging you to borrow money for investments that never existed, by helping you file false police reports against the son who was trying to protect you. Sarah, open your eyes. Look at what's actually happening here." The moment when Mom finally understood what had been done to her was heartbreaking to witness. The confusion and denial on her face gradually gave way to horror as she processed the implications of Robert's words. "My Chinese, Tommy told me the timeshare was a guaranteed investment," she said slowly. "He said I could rent it out for more than the payments. Dorothy said it was exactly what she wished she'd done when she was my age. Because Dorothy gets paid every time someone invests in one of Tommy's schemes," I explained. "She's not your friend, Mom. She's a salesperson working for criminals who target people exactly like you." The revelation broke something inside Mom that I don't think ever fully healed. The realization that she'd been systematically deceived by someone she trusted, that she'd attacked her own son based on advice from criminals, that she'd become complicit in targeting other vulnerable women. It was too much for her to process all at once. Dorothy made her escape during the emotional chaos that followed, but not before Uncle Robert made it clear that law enforcement would be visiting her very soon. Marcus, faced with the collapse of his planned Florida lifestyle, began making desperate threats about lawsuits and false accusations. But the most shocking moment came when I discovered the true extent of the financial damage while helping Mom sort through paperwork. She hadn't just lost the money she'd invested in Tommy's schemes. She'd also mortgaged the house's remaining equity to fund additional investments that had never materialized. "Mom, this document shows you borrowed $45,000 against the house," I said, holding up loan papers I'd found in her desk. "When did you sign this?" Dorothy said I needed to act quickly to secure the investment opportunity. Mom replied, her voice hollow with defeat. She said waiting would mean missing out on guaranteed returns. The guaranteed returns had never existed. The borrowed money had disappeared into the same offshore accounts that had swallowed her previous investments. And the house sale to Tommy's shell company was designed to pay off the loan, while leaving Mom with almost nothing from her decades of home ownership. As we loaded my belongings into Robert's truck, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief that defied easy description. I was finally free from a toxic situation that had nearly destroyed my career and reputation. But the cost of that freedom was the complete devastation of my family relationships and my mother's financial security. "What happens to her now?" Jessica asked as we drove away from the house for what I suspected might be the last time. We That depends on whether she's willing to cooperate with the investigation and testify against the people who defrauded her, I replied, and whether she can accept that her son was trying to help her while her trusted friend was stealing from her. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to save my mother from financial ruin, I'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that had already ruined her financially. In trying to protect my relationship with her, I'd been forced to destroy it in order to expose the truth. But as we drove through the desert evening toward our own home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the peace that comes from finally understanding reality, no matter how painful that reality might be. The house of cards had finally collapsed, and everyone involved would have to deal with the consequences of their choices. The only question now was whether any of us could rebuild something honest from the wreckage. Moving day arrived with the desert sunrise painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of childhood mornings when the world still made sense. I'd agreed to help Mom pack her remaining belongings, not out of obligation, but because Detective Morrison had requested that I document any final attempts to manipulate the house sale or destroy evidence. When I pulled into the driveway at 8 in the morning, chaos greeted me. Sarah and Marcus were loading boxes into a rented truck with frantic urgency, their movements jerky, with stress and desperation. The foreclosure notice had arrived 3 days earlier, exactly as I'd predicted, giving them less than a week to vacate before the bank took possession. "You're early," Marcus said, without looking up from the box he was carrying. His tone was flat defeated in a way I'd never heard before. The reality of losing the house had finally broken through his delusions about easy money and Florida dreams. "I said I'd be here at 8, I replied, checking my watch. "Are you almost finished?" Mom emerged from the house carrying a photo album, her face streaked with tears. She looked older than her 58 years, worn down by months of stress and the gradual realization of how thoroughly she'd been deceived. "Lynn, I don't know what we're going to do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The apartment Dorothy helped us find fell through when they ran our credit. We don't have anywhere to go." The irony was staggering. Dorothy had disappeared immediately after our confrontation the previous weekend, leaving Mom and Marcus to face the consequences of the schemes she'd orchestrated. The trusted friend who'd encouraged every bad decision had vanished the moment her own interests were threatened. "What about Dorothy's place?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I thought you were moving to Florida together." She says the timing isn't right anymore," Mom replied, unable to meet my eyes. "She says there are some complications with her son's business that make it better for us to wait." Marcus finally stopped packing and turned to face me, his expression a mixture of rage and humiliation. "Just say it, Lynn. Say you were right about everything. Say we should have listened to you instead of trusting people who actually seem to care about Mom's happiness." "I don't need to say anything," I replied honestly. "What's happening here speaks for itself." A car pulled into the driveway behind mine, and Tommy Patterson stepped out with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with slicked back hair and an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Mrs. Walsh, I hope you're ready for the closing this afternoon," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My clients are very excited to move forward with the purchase." "Actually, Mr. Patterson, there's been a change of plans," I said, stepping forward to intercept him before he could approach Mom. "The house won't be available for purchase today." Tommy's fake smile faltered slightly. I'm sorry, who are you? I'm Lynn Walsh, Sarah's son, and you're Tommy Patterson, currently under investigation by the Phoenix Police Department for elderly financial fraud. The transformation in Tommy's demeanor was immediate and complete. The polished salesman disappeared, replaced by something much more dangerous and desperate. He looked around the driveway, assessing whether anyone else was present before stepping closer to me. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this sale is going through as planned, he said, his voice low and threatening. Your mother signed a contract and she's going to honor it. My mother signed a contract based on fraudulent representations from your mother and yourself, I replied calmly. She was targeted specifically because of her financial vulnerability and isolated from family members who might have recognized the scam. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Detective Frank Morrison has been very thorough in documenting your activities over the past 2 years. 12 other elderly women have come forward with similar stories about your investment schemes. The pattern is pretty clear once you know what to look for. Tommy's face flushed red with anger and something that looked like panic. You have no idea what you're messing with here. This is a legitimate business transaction between consenting adults. Consenting adults who were lied to about the nature of the investments and the value of their property, adults who were systematically isolated from family members who might have provided different advice. That's not consent, Tommy, that's fraud. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of 2 police cars, their sirens silent, but their presence unmistakable. Detective Morrison stepped out of the first vehicle, followed by officers I didn't recognize. Mr. Patterson, we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with charges of elderly financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, Detective Morrison announced. Please place your hands behind your back. Tommy's arrest was almost anticlimactic after months of buildup and investigation. He went quietly, though his eyes promised retribution that would never come. As the police car pulled away with him in the back seat, I felt a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lift from my shoulders. Mrs. Walsh, we're going to need you to come to the station later today to provide a formal statement, Detective Morrison told Mom. Your cooperation with this investigation has been crucial in protecting other potential victims. Mom nodded numbly, still processing the reality that her trusted advisors had been criminals all along. Marcus stood beside the rental truck looking lost and confused, his entire worldview shattered by the morning's events. What happens to the house now? Mom asked. The foreclosure will proceed as scheduled, Detective Morrison explained. But we've frozen the accounts where your investment money was deposited. You should recover at least some of what was stolen, though it will take time to work through the legal process. After the police left, the 3 of us stood in awkward silence amid the boxes and chaos of moving day. All the anger and accusations of the past months seemed pointless now that the real enemy had been identified and arrested. I'm sorry, Mom said suddenly, the words barely audible. I'm sorry I believed them instead of you. I'm sorry I let them convince me you were the problem. I'm sorry I filed those reports and tried to hurt your career. Mom, no, let me finish. I was scared of losing my independence, scared of being a burden, scared of admitting I couldn't handle things on my own. When Dorothy told me you were trying to control me, it felt easier to believe that than to face the truth about how bad things had gotten. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. I'm sorry too, Lynn. I was so focused on defending Mom that I couldn't see we were defending her against the wrong person. I wanted to believe there was easy money and a simple solution because facing reality was too scary. The apologies meant more than I'd expected them to, not because they erased the damage that had been done, but because they showed that my family was still capable of recognizing truth and taking responsibility for their mistakes. Where will you go now? I asked. There's a senior living community in Tempe that has openings, Mom said. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. They have programs to help people get back on their feet after financial difficulties. What about you? I asked Marcus. I'm going to get a real job, he said, managing a weak smile. Turns out 30 years old is too old to keep pretending you're going to make it as a freelance anything. Maybe it's time to join the adult world. As we finished loading the truck with Mom's belongings, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months earlier, I'd believed I was helping my family through a temporary financial crisis. Instead, I'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that had been exploiting vulnerable seniors throughout the Phoenix area. The house where I'd grown up would be lost. The family relationships I'd valued would need to be rebuilt from scratch, and the trust that had been broken would take years to repair. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we were all dealing with reality instead of delusion. Lynn, Mom said as we prepared to leave for the last time. I know I don't deserve to ask this after everything that's happened, but would you consider visiting me sometimes? Not to give me money or solve my problems, just to talk? I looked at the woman who'd raised me, taught me right from wrong, and then lost her way so completely that she'd nearly destroyed both our lives. She looked fragile and defeated, but also somehow cleaner than she'd seemed in months. Yeah, Mom, I'd like that. As I drove away from the house where I'd spent my childhood, I felt something that surprised me: gratitude. Not for the pain and betrayal and false accusations, but for the clarity that had emerged from all of it. I'd learned who I could trust, what I was willing to sacrifice for family, and what boundaries were necessary to protect both myself and the people I loved. The foreclosure notice had been the final piece of evidence that proved I'd been right to laugh on moving day. Not because I enjoyed my family's suffering, but because truth had finally triumphed over deception, and justice had finally caught up with the people who'd preyed on vulnerable seniors. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their self-destruction even when they hate you for it. Sometimes protecting yourself from manipulation is the same thing as protecting others from predators. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people you love find their way back to honesty before it's too late to rebuild what was broken. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house with Jessica, who was now my fiancée, watching her arrange flowers from our garden while coffee brewed on the counter. The morning light streaming through the windows felt different from the harsh desert glare that had illuminated so much conflict and confusion. This light was softer, more hopeful, carrying the promise of better days ahead. "Are you nervous about today?" Jessica asked, referring to the sentencing hearing for Tommy Patterson that afternoon. "Not nervous exactly, more like ready for it to be finished," I replied, wrapping my arms around her from behind. It's been a long road to get here. The legal process had indeed been lengthy, but justice had moved steadily forward with each passing month. Tommy Patterson had been convicted on 14 counts of elderly financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. His sentencing hearing would mark the official end of a nightmare that had consumed nearly 2 years of our lives. Dorothy Patterson had accepted a plea bargain that included 18 months of probation, complete restitution to victims, and community service at organizations serving elderly populations. The judge had been particularly pointed in explaining that her role as a trusted neighbor made her crimes especially heinous. She exploited the very relationships that are supposed to provide comfort and security to seniors. Judge Patricia Hamilton had said during the plea hearing, Mrs. Patterson weaponized friendship itself in service of her son's criminal enterprise. The financial recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations. When federal investigators traced Tommy's money laundering network, they discovered assets worth nearly $400,000 that had been hidden in offshore accounts. Mom had recovered $31,000 from the seized funds, which we'd helped her use to secure proper housing and financial counseling services. She'd moved into Sunset Manor, a well-managed senior living community in Tempe that specialized in helping residents rebuild their lives after financial difficulties. The community provided not just housing, but also counseling services, financial literacy programs, and social activities designed to prevent the isolation that made seniors vulnerable to predators. Sarah's doing much better," I told Jessica as we finished our breakfast. "She's been seeing the counselor regularly, and she's actually made some genuine friends. People who care about her well-being instead of her bank account." "How's Marcus adjusting to working life?" "Better than expected. The accounting firm that hired him says he's actually quite good at client relations. Turns out all those years of smooth talking had some legitimate applications." Marcus had surprised everyone, myself included, by throwing himself into rebuilding his life with genuine dedication. He'd taken a position as a client services coordinator at a small accounting firm that utilized his people skills while providing the structure and stability he'd never had as a freelancer. More importantly, he'd been attending family therapy sessions to understand how his enabling behavior had contributed to Mom's vulnerability. "You see what's being designed? I spent so many years protecting Mom from consequences that I never helped her develop the skills to protect herself," he'd explained during one of our reconciliation conversations. "I thought love meant making everything easy for her, but it actually made everything harder." The transformation in our family relationships had been gradual but profound. We'd started with supervised visits through the family counseling program Awkward Sessions, where a therapist helped us communicate without falling into old patterns of accusation and defensiveness. Slowly, carefully, we'd begun rebuilding trust based on honesty rather than obligation. The hardest part was accepting that Lynn had been trying to protect me from the very people I thought were protecting me from him. Mom had said during one particularly emotional session, "I'd rather believe my son was controlling than accept that I'd been stupid enough to fall for such obvious lies." But Mom hadn't been stupid. She'd been targeted by professionals who specialized in exploiting exactly the fears and vulnerabilities she'd experienced after Dad's death. The investigation had revealed that Tommy Patterson's network had sophisticated psychological profiles of their targets, customizing their approaches based on careful observation of each victim's specific weaknesses. They knew she was proud and independent," Detective Morrison had explained. "They knew she was struggling financially but didn't want to burden her children. They knew she was lonely and craving friendship with people who understood her situation. Every piece of advice Dorothy gave her was designed to exploit those specific vulnerabilities." Understanding the psychological manipulation helped Mom process her own role in events without drowning in self-blame. She'd been neither completely innocent nor entirely responsible. She'd been human, responding to carefully crafted deception in ways that her attackers had predicted and planned for. The business investigation had been fully resolved in my favor, with the state board issuing a formal commendation for my cooperation in uncovering the fraud network. Several clients had actually expressed increased confidence in my services after learning about my role in protecting vulnerable seniors from financial predators. Lynn's willingness to investigate and report suspicious activity, even when it involved his own family, demonstrates exactly the kind of ethical standards we want to see in financial professionals. The board's letter had stated, "His actions protected not only his own interests, but potentially dozens of other vulnerable individuals." The professional vindication meant more than I'd expected it to. For months, I'd worried that my reputation and career might never recover from the false accusations. Instead, the truth had enhanced my standing in the community and led to several new client relationships with people who valued integrity over convenience. That afternoon, we sat in the courthouse gallery as Judge Hamilton delivered Tommy Patterson's sentence, 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and restitution orders, totaling over $200,000. "Mr. Patterson, you systematically targeted some of our community's most vulnerable members," the judge said, her voice stern but controlled. "You exploited their trust, their loneliness, and their desire for financial security to enrich yourself while leaving them emotionally and financially devastated. The damage you've caused extends far beyond money. You've damaged these victims' ability to trust anyone who offers to help them. Mom had chosen not to attend the sentencing, preferring to focus on moving forward rather than reliving the trauma of being victimized. But she'd submitted a victim impact statement that was read aloud in court. I want other seniors to know that asking for help from family isn't a sign of weakness, and that people who discourage you from seeking that help may not have your best interests at heart. I'm grateful my son never gave up trying to protect me, even when I fought against his efforts. Real love sometimes means accepting help you don't want, rather than accepting help that feels too easy. After the hearing, Detective Morrison thanked me for my persistence in pursuing the investigation, even when it meant exposing my own family's involvement. Cases like this are usually unsuccessful because victims are too embarrassed to come forward, and families are too protective to push for accountability, he explained. Your willingness to prioritize truth over family harmony made it possible to protect other potential victims. The drive home took us through Scottsdale, past the neighborhood where Mom's house had been. New owners had renovated the property, adding desert landscaping and solar panels that made it barely recognizable as the place where I'd grown up. The transformation felt appropriate. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is to build something completely different in its place. That evening, Marcus joined us for dinner at our house, a monthly tradition we'd established as part of rebuilding our relationship. He brought updates on Mom's progress and stories from his job that revealed a maturity and work ethic none of us had known he possessed. I've been thinking about what the therapist said about enabling versus helping, he said as we cleared the dinner dishes. I always thought helping meant removing obstacles and making things easier, but real help means building someone's capacity to handle difficulties themselves. That's a hard lesson to learn, Jessica observed, especially when you love someone and want to protect them from pain. The ironic thing is that trying to protect Mom from consequences made her more vulnerable to people who wanted to exploit her, Marcus continued. If she'd faced the natural results of her financial decisions earlier, she might have developed better judgment about who to trust. The conversation reminded me of the most important lesson I'd learned from the entire experience. Love without boundaries isn't protection. It's participation in destruction. Real care sometimes requires allowing people to face consequences that help them grow, rather than shielding them from difficulties that would teach necessary lessons. What's your biggest takeaway from everything that happened? Jessica asked, as Marcus prepared to leave. I thought carefully before answering, wanting to articulate something that had taken months to fully understand. I learned that my worth as a son or as a person isn't determined by other people's approval or gratitude, I said. Doing the right thing sometimes means accepting that people will hate you for it, at least temporarily. But if you're consistent in acting with integrity, truth has a way of revealing itself eventually. And for Mom and me, Marcus added, we learned that independence doesn't mean refusing all help. It means being honest about what kind of help you need and accepting it from people who have your best interests at heart. As Marcus drove away and Jessica and I settled in for a quiet evening at home, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed. A year earlier, I'd been sending thousands of dollars monthly to fund what I thought was debt reduction, but was actually criminal conspiracy. I'd been defending my character against false accusations while watching my family relationships crumble under the weight of deception and manipulation. Now we were planning a wedding where Marcus would serve as my best man, and Mom would give her blessing from her new home, where she was finally receiving the support and guidance she needed. The family was smaller than before, but healthier, built on honesty rather than obligation, truth rather than convenience. The phone rang around 9 and Mom's name appeared on the screen. These evening calls had become another monthly tradition, casual conversations about her activities, my work, and plans for future visits. "How did the sentencing go?" she asked. 5 years in prison plus restitution and probation? Justice was served? Good. I hope it prevents other families from going through what we did. She paused, then added, "Lynn, I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become. Your father would be proud too. You never gave up on what was right even when it cost you dearly." "Thanks, Mom. That means everything to me." "I love you, son. And I'm grateful every day that you loved me enough to fight for the truth, even when I couldn't see it myself." After we hung up, I sat quietly with Jessica on our back patio, listening to the desert evening sounds and watching stars emerge in the clear sky. The peace I felt was different from the simple absence of conflict. It was the deep satisfaction that comes from surviving a test of character and emerging with integrity intact. "Any regrets?" Jessica asked, reading my contemplative mood. "About fighting for the truth, never. About the pain it caused everyone sometimes. But I've learned that protecting someone from reality isn't the same thing as protecting them from harm. Real protection means ensuring they have accurate information to make good decisions." What would you tell someone else going through something similar? That family love doesn't mean accepting deception, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior. That your worth isn't determined by other people's approval, and that doing the right thing sometimes requires accepting that people will misunderstand your motives. Most importantly, I continued, I'd tell them that truth has a way of revealing itself if you're patient and persistent. Justice may be slow, but it's thorough. And sometimes the relationships that survive a crisis like this are stronger than they ever were before. As we prepared for bed that night, I thought about the question I wanted to ask anyone listening to our story. Have you ever been in a situation where helping someone actually enabled their destructive behavior? Have you had to choose between keeping peace and demanding accountability from people you love? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for more real-life stories about family relationships and the courage it takes to do what's right even when it's difficult. And please share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar challenges in their own family relationships. Thank you for listening to our story and for understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in someone's self-destruction. I hope our experience helps you find the strength to set necessary boundaries in your own life and the wisdom to recognize when tough love is the most caring choice you can make. Remember that protecting yourself from manipulation isn't selfish, it's essential, and that standing up for truth, even when it's painful, is always worth it in the end. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love by loving them, honestly, boundaries and all.